Well, I guess I can agree on one thing there. I guess if you want to give the administration high marks for following standard economic theory, I guess they do got high marks for that. The problem is the theory is all wrong. The theory that they're following is Keynesianism, and that's why we're in so much trouble. The economy would be much better off if we veered from that standard economic theory. But before I actually make my little presentation, I've made some notes of some of the things David said, but one in particular struck me when he was explaining the problems in the mortgage market and the structured products, and he mentioned that nobody noticed the problem. I beg to differ. I mean, I noticed the problem quite sharply. I wrote an entire book about the problem. I went around the country speaking about the problem. In fact, I actually specifically went to mortgage industry. I spoke for realtors and mortgage associations, specifically laying out the problem in the structured market and why the whole thing was going to collapse. So it didn't surprise me when it happened. I mean, I was expecting it to happen. Everything happened the way I thought it would. And the reason for that is because I understood how standard economic theory was destroying the economy. The topic that we're going to discuss is whether Barack Obama's plan is going to work. And I guess if if his plan is to completely destroy what's left of the U.S. economy, then I guess it's going to work. But, you know, if we're looking for any kind of lasting prosperity or solutions, the chances of it working are zero. And the reason I know the chance is zero is because we've already tried it before. And we've seen the consequences. We've seen the results. It was a disaster. Barack Obama's policy is Bush's policy. It's the same thing. Now, there's a difference in scale. Obama is doing it larger, it's bigger, so he's making bigger mistakes than Bush. But they're the same mistakes. And it's not just, Obama. He's got a partner in crime at the Fed. He's got Ben Bernanke. It's a dynamic duo. The same thing you had with Bush and Greenspan. And they're doing the same thing. So before we talk about this current crisis, let's look at the one that preceded it, the one that George Bush inherited. He stepped into a busted asset bubble. This time it was the stock market. And also briefly, David mentioned that the Great Depression was caused by a busted asset bubble. It wasn't. The busted asset bubble is what set the process into motion. But it wouldn't have been a Great Depression if the government hadn't intervened in the market, both under Hoover and Roosevelt. It was government interference in the aftermath of the bursting of that bubble that created the Depression. Now anyway, let's look at what happened in 2000. We had an asset bubble created by cheap money. This time it was in stocks. And ultimately the bubble burst around 2000. And when that happened, a recession ensued. Now, the reason you need a recession is because during the boom, people do a lot of very foolish things. Right? They make investments that they never should have made. I mean, think about all the crazy dot-com companies that came into existence during the late 1990s. Companies that never had a prayer of making money, yet there they were, occupying rental property, employing people. I mean, all of this came to an end when, we sobered up, right? I often use the analogy when George Bush said that, when he talked about the housing market, he said that America was, that Wall Street got drunk. And I always say, sure, Wall Street was drunk, Main Street was drunk, the whole country was drunk. But they were drunk because the Fed liquored them up. And when you're drunk on cheap money, you do a lot of stupid things, like investing, in drcoop.com or pets.com or all kinds of crazy things. But when they took away that cheap money and we all sobered up, we realized, the mistakes that we made. And there's a recession. People who were working for these dot-coms lose their jobs. People who thought they had a lot of money in stock options and internet stocks lost that money. They have to cut back on their spending because they weren't as rich as they thought they were. So we were going to have a recession. But George Bush comes in, and he doesn't want a recession. He just got there. Everything was great under Clinton. I don't want a recession when I'm here. So he thinks, well, what can we do? Standard Keynesian theory. Let's stimulate. Let's run off deficits. And so they cut some taxes. They increase government spending. They start running deficits to spend money. And Greenspan slashed interest rates down to 1%. That was their solution. Stimulate our way out of this mess. Right? Well, they stimulated us out of that recession into this much greater one that we're in now. And what did they do? They created the housing bubble. There would have been no housing bubble without the Fed. It would have been impossible. It couldn't have been financed. There would have never been a teaser rate. The whole teaser rates became because of the Fed 1% Fed funds rates. That's where it all came from. It wouldn't have existed without that cheap money. So we blew the air into that bubble. But the administration loved it because it kept us spending. The reason that he had that chart up there, David had that chart and showed how shallow that recession was. That shallow recession was part of the problem. It needed to be a lot deeper. It wasn't because we shot it up with all that government heroin, all that morphine, that cheap money. And so we inflated this housing bubble and we enabled consumers to spend money they didn't have. We spent trillions of dollars we didn't have. We bought all kinds of stuff we didn't make. And we were living in a delusional state. It was a bubble economy. All of the growth that we thought we had between 2002 and 2007, it was an illusion. It was a mirage. It wasn't real. We just spent borrowed money. And we went deep into debt. And we polluted all of our financial institutions with these toxic assets. It was a ticking time bomb. And ultimately, it went off. And now, the bubble bursts again. And since we had a bigger asset bubble because of the Bush-Greenspan stimulus, now we have an even bigger bust because we made even more stupid mistakes during the real estate bubble than we did during the stock market bubble because it was on a bigger scale. More Americans participated in the housing bubble than the stock market bubble. And when people were buying stocks, they pretty much did it with their own money. When people bought houses, they did it with other people's money. There was massive leverage involved. So when the stock market bubble burst, it was the people that bought stocks that lost. When it was the housing bubble, the entire economy, because the whole banking system financed the whole thing. And of course, some of the reasons that they were so quick to do it was because you had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that were guaranteeing all the mortgages. So the government was trying to take the risk out of mortgage lending so that lenders wouldn't care about the risks of not being paid back. It was all this moral hazard and cheap money that laid the foundation that made it possible. But during that time period, where Americans thought they were richer than they were, they behaved irrationally. Americans went out and bought things they couldn't afford. They bought cars, they bought second cars, they bought vacation homes, they bought plasma TVs, and they put them in every room, they remodeled their kitchens, they got granite countertops, they put in jacuzzi bathtubs. Everybody was spending money. We bought all kinds of electronic gizmos. But under normal circumstances, nobody would have spent all that money if they didn't think they had all this housing wealth. And it wasn't just the housing wealth they already had. People were extrapolating these rising home prices indefinitely into the future. So everybody that lived in a house just figured they just struck it rich. The whole country acted like they won the lottery.